Welcome to the 11 AP Grammar Intensive Unit. This is your first video for the unit. This is parts of speech and their functions, as well as phrase types. If I end up running long on the parts of speech, there may be a second video for phrase types. I may very well change it. All right, very quick review of the parts of speech, things we already know. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Nouns have a couple of different functions, and while I have these all on this slide, and they are really important, in fact they're probably the most important thing I'm going to cover in this PowerPoint, I'm not going to get to them yet. They'll come up a little bit later. Anyhow, nouns, while it seems really simple, can function as a whole lot of different things, and that becomes more important than actually just recognizing that it's a noun. You have to understand how it's working in the sentence. Second part of speech, pronouns. Pronouns, very simple. They replace nouns. All of their functions are all the same things that nouns can do. There's a whole bunch of different types of pronouns, and I'm not necessarily concerned that you memorize what all those different types are. However, you should recognize that there's some words that are pronouns that you might not normally think of as pronouns. Usually, we consider the personal pronouns and maybe the possessive ones. But I'm not sure we regularly think of these interrogative words as actual pronouns, and they can be used that way. So that's something worth pointing out in terms of pronouns. One thing that I find students struggle with in regard to pronouns is who versus whom. And here's how you can tell the difference. Who, when you use it, is always a subject of the verb. So for example, who went to the circus? Who is the subject in that sentence? Therefore, it should be who and not whom. Additionally, whom would sound kind of stupid. Whom is always going to be the object of a verb. So you may go with whomever you choose. Who you're going with is the object, so therefore it should be whom. That one doesn't sound quite as wonky if you use whoever instead of whomever. But we'll get to more explanation of subject versus object in a little bit. Here's a good way to figure out how you should use who versus whom. You use other pronouns in its place in order to test it. So, restate the clause as a statement or as an answer. If you can substitute he for it, you want to use who. If you can substitute him, you want to use whom. So for example, who went to the circus? Well, we would answer that by saying he went to the circus. He matches up with whom? With who? I'm sorry. Second example, Corey knows who made the cake. Well, if we were going to answer that question or make a statement, we would say he made the cake. He is a subject, therefore we should use who in the previous sentence. The opposite example, for whom did you vote? I voted for him. The answer to that question would be him, which means that it's an object, and therefore you would use whom. You may go with whomever you choose. I choose him. Because we're using him, we want to use whomever. Third type of part of speech, verbs. Verbs express an action or a state of being, and there's three different types. We are going to be using all of them, but in particular, the linking verbs and the action verbs are going to be most important to us for our purposes. Linking verbs describe the state or condition of things. So when we use a linking verb, those are going to be your to-be verbs, is, was, were, as well as state of being verbs, sensory verbs. They're all going to be linking verbs. Helping verbs are ones that are used with a main verb. So for example, if I said, use the phrase has given, that has would be the helping verb. And finally, we have action verbs. Action verbs are obviously the verbs that express action, but the difficulty with them is knowing whether it's transitive or intransitive. Couple of different types. Action verbs that are transitive. It means they take a direct object. We'll get more to direct objects later, but here's a couple of examples for you. The rain pelted the windows. My cousin bought a car. What you see there in red are actually transitive verbs, and you can tell that because they don't make sense without that direct object. If you said the rain pelted or my cousin bought, neither one of those sentences make a whole lot of sense. You have to pelt onto something. You have to buy something. You can't just say he bought it. It needs that direct object after it. It needs that extra bit of information. On the other hand, other verbs don't need that direct object, and they're the ones we call intransitive. The rain fell. We don't have to say where the rain fell. It just fell. It can stand alone. My cousin drove. That's just fine all by itself. Some are one. They're either transitive or intransitive. They always need that direct object or they never need it. Others can be both, such as these two examples. For example, the word sang. You could say the chorus sang songs, and songs would be the direct object, but you could also just say the chorus sang, and that would be perfectly appropriate as well. Again, more on direct objects in a little bit when we get to noun function. Adjectives. Modify nouns or pronouns. At the basic level, you've heard adjectives referred to as descriptive words, and that is very, very true. But that's not enough to help us understand the function of adjectives. Adjectives answer a couple of questions. Which one, what kind, how many, and how much. They can go in a couple of different places. They can come before the noun, such as an arduous task or a capable student. They can come afterwards, after the noun, so hikers, modified by tired and hungry. Or it could be a predicate adjective, which means it comes after a linking verb. So Deborah is practical. That is the linking verb. The practical is in the predicate. It's still an adjective, no matter where it falls. Adverbs, similar to adjectives in that they modify things. They give us extra information. As opposed to adjectives, adverbs actually modify verbs, they modify adjectives, or they can modify other adverbs. So they're a little bit more complicated to recognize because they can do a lot of different things. Adverbs tend to answer the questions where, when, in what way, or to what extent. Here's a couple of examples. So an adverb can modify a verb. She reads quickly. That answers the question in what way. Early and late. That answers the question of when. She reads thoroughly. Well, that answers the question to what extent. You'll notice that some adverbs follow that rule that you learned back in elementary school that they end with ly. Not all of them do. Another thing that they can modify is an adjective. So she is an awfully intense competitor. Awfully is your adverb, and it's modifying the adjective intense. It's telling us to what extent is she intense. How or in what way is she intense? Same thing with the final example on this page. We have a very difficult week ahead of us. Very is probably not a word that you would have considered to be an adverb. It doesn't have that ly, but it's still modifying difficult. It's telling us to what extent is it going to be difficult. Adverbs can also be used to modify other adverbs. So she skated incredibly well. In this case, the adverb incredibly is actually modifying the adverb well. She skated well. Well is the adverb. It's modifying skated. Incredibly is an adverb that's modifying well. They can be used for emphasis. Words like really, actually, truly. Nouns can also be used as an adverb. It depends on how they function. What's important with parts of speech is to realize that it's more about how they're functioning in a sentence than what the actual word is. Nouns can do a whole lot of different things. Adjectives can do a whole lot of different things. It depends on each particular sentence. That's why the functions become so important to your grammar understanding. Prepositions. Prepositions are those little words, and what they do is show relationships. They connect your nouns and pronouns to other parts of the sentence. So some examples, and there's oodles of them, but a couple of examples of prepositions are those little words in, on, above, beside. You can see they're showing relationships. They're showing where things are in relation to each other. So prepositions will always function within prepositional phrases. You'll never see a preposition by itself. And what we see in these three examples is I have the prepositional phrase in brackets and the preposition itself is highlighted in red. On the program, in San Diego, the two of us, for the magazine. Those are all your prepositions. Conjunctions. Conjunctions seem like nice, simple little things, but they may not be quite as easy. The ones you're familiar with are the coordinating conjunctions: and, but, or, nor, for, so, yet. You probably learned it in middle school as fanboys, as an acronym, and that's a great way to remember what those coordinating conjunctions are. They're really, really simple. Correlative conjunctions are ones that work together, and they're also kind of easy to spot. They work in pairs, so if you have an either, you have to have an or. If you have a neither, you have to have a nor. And granted, there's going to be something in between them. So neither this nor that. You know, both Billy and Kim. You're always going to have both of them working together. Third type of conjunction is a little bit more complex, and that is a subordinate conjunction. Here's some really good examples, a list of subordinating conjunctions: after, although, before, because, unless, where, while, etc. Okay? They introduce subordinate clauses, and we'll get to clauses next time, but a clause is something that has, it's a chunk of a sentence that has a subject and a verb. So these are clauses because they have a subject, we, and they have a verb, had. We reached. Here you've got price is. You and help. So we know these are clauses, they've got subjects and verbs. But they're subordinate because they're not the main clause of the sentence. So you could say this clause, this computer is even better than we had anticipated. Than we had anticipated is a subordinate clause, and than is the conjunction which introduces it. The sun had already set when we reached the Grand Canyon. If the price is right, I will buy your bicycle. Since you can't help me, I will do it myself. Okay? In all of those instances, those subordinating conjunctions, what I have there in brackets, are not necessary. They're not vital to the understanding of the sentence. The trick with subordinating conjunctions, however, is that most of these words, in fact, all of them, can be used as prepositions. They could be adverbs, they could be relative pronouns, they can be all different kinds of things. However, we need to notice when they are introducing a subordinate clause and understand that they're a conjunction. So it's not as simple as memorizing lists of words and saying, oh, I know that's a conjunction, or I know that's an adverb. It's not that simple. When you get taught it that way in elementary school, they're teaching you the basics. Now we're going into things that are a little bit more complex. So it becomes important to recognize how words are working in sentences. That's going to take us into our next topic, which are the different ways things can function in a sentence. And I'm already at 12 minutes and 40 seconds, so I'm going to stop this video and I will pick up again with parts of speech and phrases, part